Hey everyone, great to be with you this morning. Sometimes I ask myself, why do I believe God is true? Why do I believe God is real? And it was kind of overwhelming this morning because the story of God is so rich in people's lives. And, I'm singing these songs this morning and we've got Ashley sitting beside us, and her husband Kyle, and Adam for that matter, and Steph and their kids who were a part of our experience as we led another church here in Abbotsford, and Barry and Charlene. You think that the richness of God being at work in people's lives is just so incredibly overwhelming at times. And it's really just one of those signs, you're like, okay, where is God? But then you see what God is up to in someone else's life and how he's bringing them through the seasons of life. And it just kind of consolidates stuff at times to go, yeah, God is real because look at what he is doing. Well, almost a year ago, I listened to this really killer talk by this fantastic speaker by the name of Pete Wilson. And maybe this happens to you at times too. Pete is going through his talk and he's making these points. And, maybe this is just me. My mind, I feel sometimes I'm a little bit like Odie, if you know Odie, and it's like somebody makes a great point. The side of it is metric, and it goes up to 100, and that's probably the side that you want to use. But I would just have you do this. Like, look at that tape measure, and find the number that corresponds with your age right now. Now, it's pretty dark in here, so nobody's going to see that, so you don't have to worry. Just find that corresponding number. And then if you, will, just tear it off at that point. So here I am. I'm just going to go like this. And I'm going to take, 0 to the age that I am today. Mine's longer than some of yours and maybe not quite as long as others of yours. But I'm going to take this and I'm just going to throw it behind me. Because that 0 to the age that I am today, that's my past. And while the past is important, and while we want to learn from the past, we don't want to live in the past. And so the past is behind us. That is a life that has already been lived. And so this morning, if you don't mind picking it up after, you can just take that section of the measuring tape 0 to whatever age you are today, just toss it over your shoulder and let it be a reminder to you that your past is behind you, whether for good or for bad. Now, if you would take the remainder of the measuring tape, which is your age today, this says 100, but let's just say, it goes past 100. It's like blank, it's like infinity and beyond. And I want you to be real optimistic right now. Now, this isn't prophetic or anything, so don't get weirded out. But I'd like you to think about, how long will I live? Now, what's going to be my last year on this earth? And if you would just kind of, some of you may go, wow, I'm going to make 100 easy. So you don't have to make any terror. Some of us feel like, man, my body is going to be so sore by the time I reach 100, I think I'll settle for 90. If you would just go, okay, this is the age that I'm going to live to, and tear that off at that. Talks about in terms of eternity. What comes after this life? And the Bible has so many amazing things to say about what comes next. Now, that's a talk for another day, and I'm sure John will give that sometime in the future. Today, what I want you to do is I want you to focus with me on what's left. The number that represents your age today until your very last breath. What is this? This is your life. This is your life. And the question that I have for you today is, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to invest what God has given to you from this day to the day that you take your very final breath? Now, to help us understand this, to help us wrestle with, okay, what do we do in investing our life? I'd like you to look with me to one of my heroes. His name is Abraham. His story is found in the Bible in Genesis chapter 12, we are introduced to Abraham with these words, and you can just look up here. The words will be on the screen for you. But this is how we're kind of introduced to Abraham. God told Abraham, same guy, leave your country, your family, and your father's home for a land that I will show you. Now, that's an interesting fact here. It's, I will show you. So it's not like God's giving him the address and saying, hey, when you get here, this lovely tropical destination like it's Hawaii or whatever, then you can stop. It's like God says, just leave, and I will show you. Like when you get to the place, as you're leaving, then I'll just say at a certain point, stop, you're there. And so go to the land that I will show you. I'll make you a great nation and bless you. I'll make you famous. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, I'll curse. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left just as God said. Now, if you're here this morning and you're going, God, I'm not sure. Like, does God really exist? Is God really there? Can I really know God? If that's what you're thinking this morning, or if those are your thoughts, then you're in great company with Abraham. Because until this very moment, he had no concept of the Lord God as God introduces himself here. In fact, the context and the background that Abraham came from, he worshiped every physical thing around him in his world. So he looked at the sun, he looked at the clouds, he looked at the rain, he looked at the field. He would fashion, little idols, little carvings, after some kind of hope for fertility. And he would give offerings to these different things, these physical realities, with wishful thinking. Right? With the hope that, maybe it'll pay off, and those clouds up there will rain, or that clear sky will suddenly, magically have clouds to give rain. Of that, God appears. A personal, creator, living God appears. Now, just think about this. Because what's happening here is, in some ways, absolutely mind-blowing and crazy. Because this is like, here's God, and he's introducing himself. Like, hi, I'm God. Leave everything. It's kind of like, what? But God is saying to Abraham, what? Notice, like, leave your country. Leave your family. Leave your father's home. You just think about for a moment, what does that represent? Like, leave the country. Well, that's your land. That's like your life. That's your livelihood. That's your sustenance. Leave it. Your family. It's like, that's your brothers and sisters. That's your aunts and uncles and cousins. That's your strength and your security in this hostile, alien world. Leave them. Your father's household. You think about what family means to us. We have all kinds of different experiences of family, but probably for Abraham, that family, the personal, intimate family of mother, father, and siblings, that was like, this is where I belong. This is my worth. This is my value. And God says, hi, here I am. I'm alive. I'm real. Leave everything. Now, the crazy thing, I'll say it this way, the crazy thing, the mind-blowing thing is that Abraham leaves. Like he goes. And I have to think to myself, what was that like for Abraham? How did Abraham do that? Because I kind of know on many different levels of life what it's like for me. And by that I mean this. It's hard to change, isn't it? You ever find that? That it's hard to change? That it's hard to leave? That it's hard to grow? I mean, this gets really crazy in life because there are times where we can have really great opportunities in front of us. It might be a relationship. It might be a job opportunity. Where we say, that's a moment of great opportunity, we feel like we're stuck. You ever feel that way? Like you're frozen. Like you can't move. It's almost like you're paralyzed. It's like, yes, it's a great opportunity, but I'm kind of familiar and I'm kind of comfortable here, and I don't know. I know what this is like in my own life, what this is like in my own life. I know what this is like in other people's lives. In fact, sometimes I hear this in the context of a couple and their relationship. And they'll talk about how things aren't quite going the way that they dreamed that they would go, maybe when they stood at an altar and they said for better or for worse, and they started to feel like, hey, this is worse. What do we do about this? It's like, there's this great therapist, There's this great conference. And what is surprising, if I'm really honest with myself, it's not as surprising as it should be. But what's really surprising at times is you can say, hey, here's promise, here's opportunity, and yet we'll respond, yeah, but I'm comfortable with this. I'm used to this. And it's crazy, isn't it, in life sometimes, how we can settle for the status quo instead of moving ahead. Now, when this experience of, let's call it paralysis, becomes a normal experience in our life, sometimes we call it by a certain term, and maybe you've heard this, learned helplessness. You ever heard that term, learned helplessness? And you think about it for a moment, it almost sounds like an oxymoron. To learn helplessness. And yet maybe the elephant, baby Dumbo here, becomes this good illustration. Because this is kind of a mind-blowing thing if you think about it. Now, thankfully, this doesn't happen so much anymore. But back in the day when elephants were either bred in captivity or they were taken into captivity when they were just little Dumbos, what often happened is that you would tie this rope around their leg, or you tie this chain around their leg, and it would be attached to some kind of stake or a tree or something solid and something that was immovable for, a baby elephant. And yet what happens? Within a year, that elephant becomes the largest land mammal on this earth, and it is still held by that stake, by that rope, by that chain, right? That it could demolish with a sneeze. It's like that chain, relatively, it's just like a fine thread. It's just like a tippet on the end of a fly line, for any of you that speak that language. It's like, boom! He could break it in an instant, and yet this great mammal is held by this rope. And in many ways, that can become reflective of our experience in life. Now, it's interesting because neuroscience, and so often, what science does is it observes the realities that God, I would say, has put into place. And so neuroscience looks at this behavior, in a sense we could say, us getting stuck in our dysfunction at times, not being able to move ahead, feeling paralyzed, looks at this and it observes this phenomenon. That when we interpret a situation, notice, as negative, dangerous, wrong, or unknown, let me just emphasize, interpret. It's not saying, hey, this is a reality. It's when we interpret a situation as negative, dangerous, wrong, or unknown, a fight or flight response kicks in that moves us away from the issue and begins to resist. We see something as negative. We see something as, that's abnormal, that's terrible, that's horrible. Something in our brain chemistry then goes, I'm going to get away from it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to get away from it. I'm going to resist it as strongly. I mean, in a sense, shows us is actually absolutely the opposite. He says to us, he says, if you want to invest your life well, then what you need to do is you need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. You need to see the uncomfortable in your life as normal. Now the question is, how do we do that? Well, I hope through Abraham's example, we'll be able to answer, all of us will be able to answer that question by the end of the morning. Now, if Abraham's first principle of investment, it's kind of raising your blood pressure, you're kind of starting to get a nosebleed, then you really are not going to like the second one. Because not only is it get comfortable with the them, expect difficulties. Look what happens in Abraham's experience here. We read that God said, leave your country, your family, and your father's home for a land that I will show you. Now, let's just remember that, okay? It's not like, here's the address, lock it into your GPS. Oh, yay, we're in Maui and we're on the beaches of, whatever that secret beach is that's so awesome. It's like, no, just leave. And then one day, you get to the place where you say, stop, this is where I want you to be. It's like, oh, okay. Now the crazy thing is that God says this to Abraham, and Abraham does what? Like, whoa, he does it. He says, okay, I'll leave. And wouldn't you think the moment that he takes the first step to leave, like God says, hi, I'm God, I want you to leave. Okay, I'll leave. Wouldn't you think that his life would be like clear sailing from that moment on? It's like, come on, he took the risk. He took that out of the box, get out of your comfort zone act, and it's kind of like, from that moment on, that box of risk, it's been checked. Big sigh of relief. I don't know about you, but that's kind of the way I want my story to be written. It's like there was that time, probably like you've had as well, where you just felt like, oh, I'm being asked to do something and it's really risky and it makes me feel uncomfortable. Oh, I'm going to do it. And you take that step and you think, good. Whew, what a relief. I have done that and I will never have to do it again. But look what happens to Abraham. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. He gets to the place where God says, stop. Here it is. This is your destination. And there's a famine that is so severe that not only can he not live there, he has to leave and go somewhere else and live as a foreigner. I don't know about you, but you ever wonder, what's going on in life sometimes? Why does life seemingly go so sideways? Maybe you just play this out in life in general, or maybe you play it out in your relationship with God where you feel like, hey, I'm being asked to go somewhere, I'm being asked to do something, I want to be faithful, I'm going to suck it up, I'm going to follow, and then all of a sudden you're like, where in the world am I? What's up with that? I once heard somebody say it like this, and I think this is so counterintuitive, because if you're like me, you think, man, I take the risky step, and everything's going to be clear sailing from here on in. But rather somebody said it like this, that the bigger the dream, the bigger the fight. The bigger the dream is, the bigger the fight is that you are going to have, that you are going to encounter, that you are going to involve yourself in. Now, what does that mean? Well, just think about some of the quotes on your Twitter account, that kind of make you gag and roll your eyes, right? Like hashtag, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Hashtag, the greater the storm, the deeper the roots. Hashtag, the bigger the waves, the better the sailor. And we kind of think to ourselves like, really? But the fact is, we have those quotes because they're true. And you talk to just about anybody that has got anywhere, however we define success, however we define effectiveness, however we define a good investment of life, you talk to anyone that has got anywhere, and they will tell you what? Just about everybody says, it hasn't been going from one great experience to another. It hasn't been like clear sailing all through. It's actually been going against the current, through the storm, white-knuckling it, that has led them literally transformed them into being the person that they now are. That the growth and the depth and the richness of their life, it's been through the difficulties. It's been through facing and overcoming the problems. This became very real to me just in the last couple of weeks. Our son and daughter-in-law were kind enough to produce a grandbaby for Sandy and myself on February 11th. It's all about us, right? And Joshua and Crystal said, hey, can we have this family dedication? Wouldn't that be great? You take your pastor dust and sprinkle it over him and all that, and wouldn't that be fun? And I'm like, it'd be so cool to do. And so I'm getting ready for the dedication, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is going to be like the best prayer that I ever made. It's going to be like the perfect prayer, and it's going to be a prayer because, love my grandson, hard to describe, right? You have a grandchild, it's like, this is so amazing. I won't go on. And you think to yourself, I want to pray for the perfect life, like we do for our kids, for our grandkids, for this precious life. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm interrupted as I'm planning my great prayer. Because that isn't life, right? Life isn't perfect for any one of us. Life doesn't go the way that we think it will for any one of us. There are all kinds of twists and turns and difficulties and problems. And so my prayer for my precious grandchild becomes, God, this baby, this child, this young man, grow up to be a person who has a heart that is wholly devoted to you. Because that's a good life. And that's the life that Abraham exemplifies for us. Everything. Abraham leaves, goes to the place, or finally gets to the place where God intends for him. Oops, there's a famine going on. Sorry, you've got to leave. What's up with that? Remember, we had said that when we interpret, notice, when we interpret a situation as negative, you see on the next slide here, as negative, as dangerous, as wrong or unknown, a fight or flight response kicks in that moves us away from the issue or begins to resist, right? But neuroscience has shown, has studied, and has conclusively shown that the opposite is also true. Notice, if you and I see a situation, an opportunity, even a problem that needs addressing as within the range of normal, expected, and known, I love this. The human brain automatically marshals all available resources and moves to engage it. There is a radically opposite, different response. Now, how does that happen? Well, we keep learning from Abraham, and we realize, we say to ourselves, we just admit, you know what, life, it's not going to be like this great long Disney epic without any villain. But that life is going to be filled with challenges and problems and difficulties, that the bigger the dream, the bigger the fight. And that's okay, because I'm up for it, because that's the reality of life. Look at your measuring tape, because this is our life. How are we going to invest it well? Well, Abraham reveals to us a third principle. And the third principle is this, and maybe you found this to be true. are contagious. Both courage and fear are contagious. And maybe you have found this to be true. This incredible promise, and he said, you know what? Through you, all the peoples of this earth, all the nations of this world will be blessed through you and through your offspring. Well, if you know anything about Abraham, you realize that at this point of the story, they don't have a son. Like, they don't have any offspring. And then God again appears and he says to them, hey, about this time next year, you are going to have a son. Sarah, you are going to have a son. And the amazing thing is that this is what we read following God's announcement. Or else cry hysterically. I don't know, one or the other. But God's question is, why did you hard for the Lord? And then it goes on, God says, I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. And I just think, why is that so significant? What's being said here? Well, let me ask you, have you ever had a dream? Have you ever felt something so deeply? Have you ever believed something so strongly? Have you ever had a dream? It was just so vivid, and you finally told it to somebody, maybe somebody close to you, and they just laughed. It was like, yeah, right. Like, good luck with that. But you see, the reality is that both fear and courage are contagious. And there are going to be people, perhaps at times the very people that are the closest to us, that as we share our dream with them, they are going to rain on our dream. They are going to, I can say it, they are going to poop on our parade. The people that are the closest to us, because both fear and courage are contagious. And so the most important question that you and I can ask ourselves is this: whose voice are we going to listen to? What promise are we going to believe in? Who are we going to trust? Which leads us to the last point of a life invested well, and that is the question, what about God's dream for you? What about God's dream for your life? And you might say this morning, well, I don't really believe in God. That's okay, because God believes in you. God made the greatest sacrificial act that this world has ever known to tell you, to send you a message of how deeply he believes in you and he loves you. So let me ask you the question, what about God's dream for your life? What about God's promise for you? Because the final principle of investment Abraham leaves us is act on belief instead of doubt. Act on belief instead of doubt. You know, every choice, every action that we make is either informed by doubt or belief. I know we think about optimists and pessimists and all that, but the reality is that both unbelief and belief exists in each one of us. Each one of us is filled with belief and unbelief. But the difference that occurs in our life, in a life that is lived and invested well, is a life where there is the constant choice to believe. The constant focus on belief, to engage. And so we can say this, if you look up here again for a moment, that it is belief in God and his promises that enables any, and I would say every situation and opportunity to fall within the range of normal, expected, and known, allowing the human brain to marshal all available resources to engage it, not to flee from it, not to be stuck like that elephant by the stake in this little rope, but to engage whatever it is that we encounter in life. And you see how this plays out in Abraham's life. Because we read this. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abraham said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. And then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him out of the stars, if indeed you can. Think about that. Look at the stars. Count the stars. Huh? You ever do that on a beautiful starlit night? Like 1, 2, 3,468, 4,002. Oh, where was I? 1, 2. It's like, it's not a test. It's God's declaration that He is God. And that we can trust Him with His promises. That we can continue to choose to believe, to respond in faith towards whatever God promises and whatever God says is true. And you see this in the magnitude of what God says to Abraham, because He reveals a part of Himself that Abraham had never seen before. And God says what? I am your shield. I am the one that you can count on. I am the one that's strong even when you're weak. I am your very great reward. And every time Abraham started to take matters into his own hands, what happens? His life goes sideways. But all of a sudden, there is this reassurance of the strength and the power and, frankly, the love of God for His Son, that He declares to every one of us through His Son, Jesus Christ, who becomes the embodiment of God's forgiveness and love and power for each and every one of us. And so I want to invite you this morning in closing to think about these life principles, these principles of investment that Abram leaves us, to just take a moment and just look at this night sky that's behind us. And think about what God's declaration means to you as it did to Abraham. That as you go through this life, you can know that God is the one who will never leave you. God is the one who is always faithful. That He is your shield and your